I'd like to introduce our very patient.
No, absolutely.
What's happening here?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Many of you already know she's a person who really does a neat introduction. But for those of you by any chance having had the opportunity to meet Sherryl Saunders, she is a key person in Queensland. She has done a fantastic work of advocacy for language teaching in Queensland, but also she is a fantastic rep for all of us at a national level. As many of you may know, she is the secretary of the Australian Federation of Modern Language Teachers Association. And today she's going to talk about a topic which is very close to all our hearts, Australian curriculum languages. Where are we and what may come next? So thank you. Let's give her a big clap. Thank you, Cheryl.
Well, I think reserve the applause to the end. Look, I absolutely encourage you to interact. It's in the asking of the question that we actually learn more. Okay, so what am I going to do? Can I also say, if you're at the QSA conference earlier in the year, or the Japanese language teachers seminar, there are a lot of overlap. Okay, so basically we're trying to share the message, share the information, and get out what can you do to be an advocate for languages and languages education in your classroom, in your schools, and with your principals and heads of faculty and heads of department. So, a basic overview. The first part, talking about shaping the curriculum, you probably know already. In terms of designing the curriculum, I'll add some more information that is very much an evolving story, and we're at the point of ready to trial what the writers believe are appropriate curricula in the languages. And then here's guess what's in the black box, implementing the curriculum. We don't necessarily have a lot of information there, primarily because of uncertainties with ACARA and the ACARA federal government relationship. Okay, so shaping the curriculum. You do have the complete text of the slides in front of you. I do not like presenters who talk to the slides, who read the slides out. You are literate people, you can read. If you catch me doing it, stop me. Okay, so basically when the task of, say, ACARA saying we need a languages curriculum that is contemporary, that is appropriate for Australian students, what do we need to consider? And that was right across the board. What do we need to consider in English? What do we need to consider in maths? So the process that they've designed is one that starts with shaping. They have an eminent person in the field develop a document that says, if we're going to have a contemporary curriculum in, what should it look like? So Angela Scorino, Associate Professor Angela Scorino from the University of South Australia, was tasked with writing a curriculum document. It was out for consultation, and hopefully you all took the opportunity to respond to it. It's interesting, the confusion between levels of government. Many teachers here probably thought they were responding to ACARA when they actually ended up responding to QSA, because in terms of the number of responses to the SHAPE document, they were in the less than the hundreds. Less than 100 comments were received on the SHAPE document. But many people said, I did respond. And I think people were responding to, say, their statutory authority, like QSA, not realising that all of their response went into one consolidated document from QSA to ACARA, and it was registered as one. Whereas, you needed to find ways around it. Okay, so let's get back to shaping. So if you read the SHAPE paper, and it is still available on the website, the important things that came from that document were these ones. It is a changing world in terms of languages, both in terms of language use and languages education. We also have a changing student in our classroom. So learner identity is very different. And learner identity in a languages classroom is an extremely important aspect that we have to respond to. You only have to be a Chinese teacher to know that intimately. But if you have native speakers in your classroom, regardless of what language you teach, alongside a second language learner who is an absolute beginner, and you know learner identity is important. We also have, as ever, as does every other curriculum area, a changing understanding of what is appropriate pedagogy. We've lived for any number of decades with a communicative language teaching philosophy that languages are learned best when we have real purposes for and real use for real language. Over recent times that is been morphing, and what has been emerging is an intercultural approach, intercultural language teaching and learning. So how does that get incorporated into curriculum documents? Okay, so they were the primary considerations in terms of what do we need to have our languages documents respond to. Okay, let's talk about, if this is the shape of the landscape, what is the consequential impact on design? Okay. First one, what's the obvious response to learner identity? Well, first of all, let's talk about what characteristics do they bring to the classroom in terms of their own language use. Their own language use in terms of the classroom, but also in terms of the language being learned in the classroom. So, are they a second language learner? So, for them, is this language that you are teaching, is it for them there's a second language or nth language? Is it something that they're coming to as an absolute beginner or with some limited experience, but they've got no outside experience, as opposed to, say, a background language learner? Now, background language learner is very contested space. We all know that, and you know it can be anyone from the learner who has, you know, no at home and can understand what they say to them, but will speak back in English, right through to the learner who attends a Saturday class, but for whom it is not a language of everyday use, and it's not a language that would classify them as a first language learner. A first language learner, in terms of the definitions for languages curriculum, the first language learner must have had at least their primary education in the language being studied. So they, for all intents and purposes, have a primary school literacy in that language. So they have some control over written and oral forms of texts that would be studied in a primary classroom. Okay, that was the first thing that was taken into consideration in terms of designing the curriculum. The other aspect, which is the pathways, is the one that we all know. We know that one of the hardest classrooms to manage effectively for learner is that grade 8 classroom. Why? Because many of our students will come to us having had a variety of experiences in primary school, and they might even have the same language but to different extents. So the pathways acknowledge that there are many pathways through a languages school experience. You can have a primary language experience which dovetails beautifully into a secondary language experience. We also know that in terms of a primary experience, there are pathways within pathways. It's not just from P to 6. It could be 3 to 6. It could be 5, 6. Okay. Note some of the language in there. F, you will hear things like F to 10 or 7 to 10. F means foundation. We would talk about prep. Okay, so F to 6 is the primary part of the course. 7 to 10 is the secondary. Now, for us in Queensland, that is quite appropriate as from next year. Don't forget, this is due for implementation at some stage. We should be ready for implementation next year in 2015. The other thing to note is a combination of pathway and learner characteristics. In the first language learner pathway, there is only ever a sequence that is 7 to 10. Okay? So you won't ever see an F to 6 or an F to 10 sequence in a first language learner pathway. Why? Because there is the presumption that the students, in terms of a first language learner, have undertaken their primary education in that first language, presumably in country. Okay, if you go back to the shape paper, you will find definitions of the different types of learner. You will also find some interesting information, and it's interesting. You need to understand that ACARA will clearly, it takes every opportunity to say, its remit is for curriculum development. It has no power to implement. Okay? So implementation is the responsibility of the states and territories. It's the responsibility of your educational authority, your independent school, your Catholic education authority, your government schools. However, in developing a curriculum, you couldn't do that without some parameters, without some guidance for the writers to actually help them decide what's appropriate for the curriculum. So, in terms of the F to 6 sequence, the amount of time for F to 6 is 350 hours of learning across the 7 years. Now, there is meant to be some flexibility, whether that's done as 5-6, 3-4-5-6, F to 6. But it is designed for learning of 350 hours. The 7 to 8 sequence is designed for 160 hours, a further 160 hours. Years 9 and 10 is designed with a further 160 hours, so a total of 380 hours. And the 11-12 sequence, which is not even being considered yet, is written with the consideration of a further 2 to 240 hours. Okay, any questions?
Can you just repeat, Cheryl, what you said, 160 for each of 7, 8 and
9, 10, yes?
That's 320 hours.
Is it 320? Okay, good. I said 380, didn't I?
And I thought, oh, that's good.
Okay, 320. It is 160 and 160.
Yes.
Don't trust my addition.
Yes.
Okay, so 320. Okay. 350 F to 6, 320 7 to 10. Okay. Can I say that the design, the curriculum design, is for each of the languages should enable a pathway to be written for each of those learner groups. So you can have a pathway, a curriculum that is F to 10 for the second language learner. Insert language name here, in Japanese. You can have a pathway that is F to 10 for the background language learner. F to 10. You can have a learner pathway for the first language learner that is 7 to 10. So you can have for each language 3 different curriculum. It doesn't mean you are entitled to 3 different classes of students, because we know we will end up with classes who have second language learner and background language learner and first language learner in them. But the theory says they would be exposed to different curricula based on learner identity. Okay. Here are the languages. This was the only thing that got a bit of an interest in the federal budget. First dot point, second dot point have been done or are in the process of being done. So, languages of the current curriculum work, Arabic, Chinese, so on. At the same time, we've been developing a framework for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. Okay, and if you noted the federal budget, there was money in there for the development of classical languages and Hindi and Turkish, or was it just Hindi and Turkish? I can't remember now. There was something in the recent federal budget for Hindi and Turkish, at least I know that. Okay, so why those languages? Why those languages? Because they do represent the majority of languages that our students in Australian schools take. Of course, it certainly doesn't represent all languages. I think there is an incredible number of languages that students can take in Australian schools. Can I also say, one of the things that AFMLTA has given some consideration to and has pitched to different organisations is the idea of a generic framework that can be used by, for example, the Polish community if they wanted to develop a curriculum for the learning of Polish in a second language context. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of money around at this point in time for somebody to undertake that sort of work. Okay, we all get down to grubby money. In terms of where are we and what pathways are being developed for what languages, this page. So, in terms of a second language learner pathway, they are the languages. For the majority of languages, Chinese being the exception, there is only one pathway that is being developed through the auspices of ACARA. Okay? So the majority, as you can see, are second language learner pathway curricula. Why is that? It is because the majority of students in Australian schools taking these languages under the second language learner pathway are second language learners. Of course, there will be, the group of students who are, first language learners in Japanese anywhere, or background language learners. But the majority of our students in Australian schools studying Japanese are second language learners. That's why the Japanese pathway is up there. In terms of the background language learner, the majority of students for Arabic are background. And the same with Vietnamese. And the only first language learner pathway developed is Chinese. Now, originally when there was discussion about what languages do we develop to begin with, the decision was Chinese and Italian. The reason for choosing particular languages was to test out the framework. What's the point in spending all of this money developing curriculum if the basic theoretical framework doesn't work? So go back to the shape paper, it says learner identity is one of the most important factors. We have to consider that in what we do. So we need to develop pathways, and this is what you need to do. Writers are tasked with writing the curriculum for Chinese, but it's not just the Chinese curriculum. It is a Chinese curriculum for the second language learner, which is different to the Chinese curriculum for the background language learner, which is different to the curriculum for the first language learner. Does the framework work? Who is the most, what's the most contested space? It is Chinese. We hear it all the time. Okay, so Chinese will test out the framework. The other one chosen was Italian. And Italian was chosen because, yes, there is a strong cohort of second language learners, particularly in primary schools, in Italian. There would also be significant groups of background language learners in Italian in different places in Australia. So it was chosen as a Romanised language that could test the framework. Now, I think very quickly on they realised how expensive these sorts of tasks are, and it was determined that there were only ever going to be one pathway for the majority of languages. Therefore, the Italian background language learner pathway was dropped off and became a second language learner. You might also note that Korean is in the second language learner pathway. Originally, it was in the background language learner pathway, but advocacy from the Korean embassy and further review saw Korean move from a background language learner pathway to a second language learner pathways, and the writers had to respond to that change. Okay, so, but theoretically, anybody who's got the time and the inclination and the money could set to and develop a second language learner pathway for Arabic and the background language learner pathway for Arabic, and so on, and same for all of them. Okay. Questions? Everybody's worried about the reports. Okay. We're going to actually start and really mix things up and throw a lot of detail at you. Okay. We start talking about bands of schooling. Why we start talking about bands of schooling becomes really important when we start talking about the achievement standards. Okay. So each pathway has been divided up into a variety of bands. I would suggest probably concentrate on looking at the second language learner pathways for the purposes of this presentation. You've got the information here. Go back and study it in detail later. So when we talk about the bands, if you know anything about the ACARA curricula in other areas, English, Math, Science, History, generally you have a year level and an achievement standard for that year level. In languages, slightly different. You will have a band of schooling and an achievement level that goes with that band of schooling. Okay? So you won't see the F achievement standard. You will not see the year 1 achievement standard. You will see the F to 2 achievement standard for Japanese. You will see the 3 to 4 achievement standard. You will see, and it's important to note which sequence you're talking about. The ideal is an F to 10 sequence. I start my language learning in F and I go through in the same language to year 10. But as we noted before, a lot of our students change schools in secondary school and will change languages. So there is a sequence of learning that is designed for a beginner in year 7. So you have the F to 10 sequence, but you also have a 7 to 10 sequence. The achievement standards are different. So the achievement standard that is for 7 to 8 in the F to 10 sequence is different to the achievement standard that is in the 7 to 10 sequence. Questions? Oh, really? Do I have to think that hard?
What's the rationale for it?
Well, the rationale would be that if you've had 350 hours F to 6 and you've experienced another 160 hours in 7 and 8, aren't you going to be demonstrably different to a student who has had something significantly less in if you've begun the language? You know, we know that whilst I might pick up a new language, you know, this is all the stuff that you...
Because I thought you wouldn't.
Yeah, no. And look, any of us could have answered that, and yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Just a thought, just seeing the bands,
Yep.
meaning by the end of prep to year 2,
Yes.
they can achieve this.
Yes. We'll have a look at an achievement standard.
Would that kind of imply that there shouldn't be achievement marks for prep in year 1?
What they're trying to do is say there are ways of doing F to 2. You know, so some schools will enable a student to begin at F and do, you know, even out the time over 1 and 2, but some schools don't, and they will do things differently, and it's how do you actually allow for that differentiation in programming, but also how do you, what does a year 2 person, what does a year 1 person, what does a preppy do with, and we'll actually have a look at an achievement standard. It was, can I tell you, we were actually lucky to get an achievement standard at F to 2. They were considering not having an achievement standard until year 6. They were going to have one achievement standard for primary school. And the howls, so I'm on the advisory panel. There is myself and Marcel Nurst from IML. We're not there as Queenslanders, but we're the only 2 Queenslanders on the panel. Panel is made up of language teachers from all around Australia in different roles. Wendy Hewitt is a Japanese teacher in the department in WA, but she comes from a primary languages classroom background. The howls of you cannot have one achievement standard for the whole of primary school. You want to marginalise and disenfranchise primary languages, do that. You know, if you had one achievement standard. So if the decision was we think about bands of schooling, then we had to do that across the whole of the primary school. If you notice all of the others, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are in 2-year blocks. F to 2 is the only difference. So, and it made sense in that respect.
Can I just thing on that? So I think what we're trying to push, because we've got the same story, should that imply that you only report on those children at the end of that band juncture? So or do you report each year and give different standards to different levels? I would have a personal view on that. ACARA will say reporting's not their issue. Their remit is to write. How we do it is up to jurisdictions. I would be saying you report how your school says you should report. If you need to report every year, you report every year. But what are you reporting on? You would be reporting on the achievement standard and whether, as I say, we'll have a look at the achievement standard and you're going to go, oh, how do we do that? But if you think about it as for something like F to 2, you've got 3 years. So you might be doing something along the lines of within this achievement standard we have done, you know, and your child can do this. That's interesting. Run forward actually over the last 2 years, we've got some prep, and gradual process.
Yes.
And I fought vehemently not to A to E grade or perhaps
Yeah.
1s and 2s, and we actually
Let's define a 4-year-old as failing. Yes, let's do wonderful things for them. Yeah, yeah,
It's just really
yeah. Now,
to hear that.
yeah, this talks of the achievement standard. Well, let's wait. Let's come back to the conversation when we have a look at the achievement standard. Now we start to get into affirming territory, things that we know. Okay, so the design paper, the shape paper said, look, we need to be able to write a document and articulate what it is students are going to learn and be able to tell people what they're learning. And they need to be able to do those 3 things: communicate, understand language and culture, and understand themselves in this process. The 2 strands of all languages curriculum, not the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages framework, they have a different framework behind it, but the other languages have these 2 strands: communicating and understanding. Okay. If you remember any of the work, if you remember the original shape paper, there were actually 3 strands. And we all... what was the third one? Do you remember? Reciprocating. No, reciprocating. It recommended 3 strands. However, the feedback from the community, from the teaching community, and I remember the meeting where Rob Randall challenged us all. How do I know reciprocating when I see a student doing it? Tell me how I recognise that they're reciprocating when they're doing something. And it couldn't be done to his satisfaction. The teacher said, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be, putting into the tasks and into the curriculum. So that the response was taken, okay, let's go back to 2 strands. Reciprocating is seen to be an integral part of both communicating and understanding. So it is still within the philosophy, but it's subsumed into and incorporated into both communicating and understanding. Okay. So, if we've got our strands, the little dash marks represent the sub-strands. So communicating is about capturing the language learning through various purposes or dimensions. So how do you do that? I think you'll find that those dashes, the words again, are reasonably familiar. So socialising, taking action, obtaining and using information, so on. Can I tell you translating is more than take something in one language, written in or said in one language, and move it to another? It's something bigger than that. It is about how do I incorporate the intention of what is trying to be communicated. It is how do I translate the message. And it's not the verbatim, this word for this word. Okay. Again.
That's what I'm talking about, I call a messy set. Because the first 3 are different from the other 2, aren't they? The first 3 belong.
Which one of these are not like the other?
The first 3 belong to that set of like language functions.
Yep, they do. Yeah.
But the other 2.
And this is where you're going to see the incorporation of reciprocating. So yes, they are very much about language use, but what do you need to do in terms of moving from one context to the other in terms of a reciprocating? That's more that translation and reflecting on intercultural use of a task. And in terms of the understanding, you're going to see the same thing. systems of language, language variation and change. These two are, which one of these is not like the other? The role of language and culture, again, would be that different aspect that's more about how do we ensure reciprocating from that pedagogical intercultural language teaching and learning perspective is incorporated into a curriculum document. Okay.
I'm assuming that somebody translating is going to be defined and elaborated
Yep. There is what's called a glossary. Couldn't think of the word. There is a glossary that's being developed because we do use words differently in a languages context to the same word in an English context. And
I noticed that the second class one there, language variation and change, is more or less lifted straight from the English syllabus, but I wonder if it'll be used differently.
Yep.
Different understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the glossary will includes definitions. Yeah. Okay. Take a breath, folks. I get worried when I show this next slide. Yeah. Okay. So basically what's happening here is taking that view of here's the strand, communicating. There are 5 substrands. So what is a description of socialising and taking action? That's that next point. So this is meant to be a pictorial representation of the relationship between strands, substrands, and a definition. Okay. So this is the same framework that is used in all languages and in all pathways. Okay, so you'll see the same framework regardless of what pathway you are looking toward. Any questions? Now the important part is to actually take the 1.1 and develop, how do you develop socialising and taking action in whatever pathway you're planning for. So if you're thinking about Japanese from F to 10, what does it look like? And this is what it will look like. This is from the French curriculum. So this is 1.1, the socialising and taking action. And this is what's called the content descriptors. So this is what you do with your students in a classroom. So you want your students to be able to interact with each other and the teacher using simple language, yada, yada, yada. So that's your developmental sequence. Where do you begin and where do you progress to? So, yeah.
If you start language in grade 5, you would be doing all the things we've done.
You will have to, yeah, that's right. And that's where you need to, and your school leadership, because I think we will understand, we'll take on that idea quite well, that, okay, time on task and all of that, we can do all of the prior. You can't start at this point, but it's making sure our leadership teams and our school timetablers and all understand that, yes, you can't begin with use simple language in routine exchanges if you haven't done the foundational work first. You have to do it, yeah. What's the necessary, what's the corollary that goes with that? Well, you can't get the same achievements with the same, if you divide 350 up against the X number of years and say, well, we only have to do an hour and a half a week. You can't say, let's start in year 5 at an hour and a half a week and get them to the achievement standard for the end of year 6. if they only have half the time. You know, let's be sensible about this. Okay, so there's your, again, content descriptors are prescribed for each pathway and each substrand in the pathway.
This will be the second language learner.
Yes, this is the second language learner pathway. It's the same framework. You can expect to find the background language learner pathway to be something similar. To say socialising, what does socialising look like in a background language learner context, and therefore what is the elaborated progression from F to 10 in a background language learner. Yeah. Okay. So some specific examples.
What's this one example?
Okay, yes. Breathe, because now, if you want to go back, if you want to have a look at, I'll go back 2 slides. Now, I don't know if this actually has, okay, it does. See this one? It's about socialising and taking action, interacting orally and in writing to exchange ideas and opinions. Okay, go forward to... Okay, there's the full text of what 1.1 looks like. That's the full text. So there are actually 3 content descriptors that go with what we had as one box 2 slides back.
And this is for F2?
Yeah, this is the F to 2 sequence out of the French. You'll notice at the bottom in square brackets are concepts and processes. It's trying to identify for you what are the concepts that should be developed, that the writers believe learners should be developing, therefore teachers should be scaffolding. This one actually has both concepts and processes for all of them, but not each section, not each one will have concepts and processes and will not have the same concepts and the same processes all the time. Again, that's going to be a part of professional development to try and how do we put all of this together? Yeah.
My question is, are we supposed to cover all of them, or can we choose?
No, the achievement standard would be based on an understanding that learners have had opportunity to, don't forget that's 3 years, across their 3 years to be exposed to all of that within the interacting orally and in writing to exchange ideas substrand. So remember that there is 2 strands, communicating, understanding. Substrands, there are 5 substrands. This is 1 substrand and there are 3 sub-substrands. Now,
And I was just reading out all, to me, the descriptor 1 and 2 are the same.
that could be OE if it is. OE, operator error.
No, 1 and 2.
1 and 2, yeah. 2 and 3, yeah. That could be my copying of the table. How you check, this document, the French document, is actually still on the ACARA website. You can go in and find the content descriptor for F to 2 in the socialising and taking action and see which one I'm wrong in. It was just really a test to see if you stayed awake.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Well, we've got draft.
Yeah.
I don't recall seeing it in that format. We've got it.
Okay.
Has it changed its format at all? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's just sort of more like a narrative, what we got last year.
Right, okay. No, it will be, it won't actually be there in that form. I actually had to extract it to put it in here. What you're going to see is something that looks more like that. Yeah. Let's have a look. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, but you should be able to, within one of those landscape tables, find that information. So, this is substrand, communicating strand, substrand socialising, taking action. There are 3 sub-substrands. Let's go on to the next one. Remember I said there are 5 substrands. The next one was using and obtaining and using information. Michelle made the comment that the first 3 about look like language functions. Yes, they do. So, 3 sub-substrands. In obtaining and using information, there are 2. And there are 2 in responding and expressing imaginative experience. There are 2 in translating, and there are 2 in reflecting on intercultural language use. That's the level of complexity that you're going to get for all of them. Okay? Strand, substrand, sub-substrand. So 2, 8, and then any number.
Cheryl, is
Yep.
there an intention to take it one level further down with elaborations, the way we have in the English syllabus?
Yes, yes.
Each time you click on a content descriptor in the English syllabus,
I don't know if there's going to be that level of interactivity with the languages just because there are so many languages. But looking at what's come through in terms of, is that an elaboration or is that a content descriptor? Is that, what are we looking at? Has been discussed. So how it looks to end user, I don't know that ACARA has decided as yet. But in terms of writer and advisory panel, providing advice, it's about separating out, well, what is an elaboration and what is a content descriptor. The idea that elaborations exist is certainly in people's minds. Yeah, that's right. I remember doing this table for this presentation because I hadn't seen it quite like this in the 2 columns. But I was sure I had this information, like what's under the content descriptors 1, 2, 3, in a cell, but in a different table. So what I actually had to do was pick up that cell from that place that was in a table that had 3 columns, not 2, and do some manipulation on it. So, but look, the advice that this is helpful is useful information. As I said, AFMLTA really does want to consider a generic framework, and if this is useful for teachers and teacher use. Yep. Well, let's have a look at the achievement standards. Whew. Okay. Here is the Year 2, F2 achievement standard, page 1. And there is a page 2. Can I tell you that the achievement standards are reasonably consistent in terms of length, not because that's what writers were told to do. I think it's just the way that they've turned out. Okay, so that's a bit of, this is what we know, this is what we've got, this is what we're working with, this is what's been approved. Okay, so this is, let's peer into the black box and guess what comes next. I think we have been somewhat lucky that we've had the ministers slow us down a little bit, because the Indonesian and French curriculum have been on the website far longer than the Chinese and the Italian curricula were. And I think it's just because there's been no advice back. So you can get those two curriculum documents, the French and Indonesian, off the ACARA website. You can check them out in terms of looking at them from your own language's perspective. Not helpful necessarily if you're coming from a background language learner or a first language learner perspective, but if you are teaching your language as a second language, as I said, the internal framework is the same. So the developmental progression was the three pathways for Chinese and the Italian were developed first. They were given a small trial. There were schools in Queensland that did trial both the Chinese and the Italian. So hand-picked, tapped on the shoulder, do some work, go through a refinement process. It was sent to the ACARA board for approval. That happened in December. Approval for broad trial for the three pathways in Chinese and the pathway in Italian. So that's 4 curricula were approved in December. The process is, once the ACARA board has approved, the Ministers of Education have to approve. The Ministers of Education went meeting through, used to be called Maketia, ASOC, so sad, I don't know what it's called these days, but there is a ministerial group of the education ministers that do meet, and they will have various items for discussion, and approval of curriculum area is an item on their agenda. So the ministers were meeting in April, and the 4 curriculum area for Chinese, 3 for Chinese, 1 for Italian, was on their list. In the meantime, both French and Indonesian go up on the website for comment and are approved by the ACARA board. So they get added to the 4 that were approved in December, and the ministers were asked to approve those 2. So we've got 6 curriculum waiting for trial. ACARA says it's good to go, that it's now time for teachers to have a go at this and provide their feedback. That meeting was the 11th of April. We still have nothing. We have nothing from the ministers. Now, why?
It was approved, it says it went to them for approval.
Yep, that's right.
It's still a bit
Yep,
question mark.
yep, that's right.
Are you thinking about ministers of education
Minis-
every state? Or
Yes.
ours?
No, the Commonwealth gets together all of the ministers of education. So it's the 8 state and territory ministers and the federal minister have So the 9 of them get together. This group does actually have a name. I don't know what the contemporary name is. I can never remember it. It used to be called Maketia, but it's not. It's not. It's that same group of people. In December, I was with a group of teachers, and there was a colleague of mine who does a lot of work in phys ed, and the ministers were meeting, and there was the new phys ed curriculum, and on that ministerial meeting was approval for trial of the phys ed curriculum, and they refused trial. They refused to. It is there, it's done, it was approved by the ACARA board, but the ministers refused to allow schools to trial it. Now that was in December last year. I don't know why it was refused, but the suspicion is potentially it was because they were waiting to announce the review of the first phase of curriculum areas, math, science, English, math, science and history, and the cross-curricular priorities. So it was held off, waiting for that, the outcomes of the review, and we suspect that might be part of the issue for the languages curriculum as well. They're awaiting the outcomes of the review in the first 4 and the review of the cross-curricular priorities. I thought it was July. Yeah. So middle of the school holidays or something like that. Yeah. So in the grand scheme of things, what was supposed to be happening, that this coming semester, as in semester 2, 2014, we should have had all curriculum area in languages ready for open trial, for teachers to have a dabble in it, and to provide their feedback in order that the documents can be refined and reviewed, ready for implementation next year. We can't trial anything without ministerial approval. Work is still continuing on. So we know that, as I think, did I put it down there? Yeah, last page. German, Japanese, Korean, Spanish, I think went to the board for approval of their May meeting. We haven't heard of the outcome, but it's another step in the process. You need ACARA board approval before it goes to the ministers for their approval. So the work is continuing on all languages at the writer level, at the ACARA level, at that developmental phase. We can only but hope that the minister does give the approval. Generally what ACARA does is they will send out, they will advise the advisory panel where when the board has approved, and it has no more status than the board has done something. It doesn't make it any more available to you. What is more important is waiting for the ministerial release of that, and that will come through generally a media release from ACARA to their mailing list. They will say such and such a document is now available for trial, which is what they've done for other curriculum areas. However they've launched them, that's what they will do for languages. And generally it will come through probably a soft opening of however the documents will be available online. So they just put up the website, don't necessarily tell anybody that they've done it. They might make a few people know, and then they will do the proper launch and saying it's up there. It's almost like the soft launch is to ensure that there's no bugs in the software and the access that people get, or what people will actually see when they click into something. And then when they're reasonably confident that it's going to go without a hitch, they send out the media release and say, this is available for teacher trial. What I think often bureaucrats forget are that schools don't turn around on the head of a pin. It takes a bit of time to actually think about what they're going to be working with and teaching their students next semester. They're not going to be able to plan for a change or significant change in June, July holidays for semester 2. I think the best that we can do is have teachers who are prepared to dabble around the edges on something with our class or our year level, looking at what they need to do with their programs in order to respond to ACARA curricula. If you're a member of MLTAQ and on the mailing list, as soon as we get something, we try to disseminate, because it is, as you say, infrastructure is much more fractured, and we have to ensure that we have the corpus that will actually build that momentum. can I say, now Cynthia she's on a plane to Sydney tonight, but Amanda is also on MLTAQ Executive, as is Michelle. The focus this year, and Kerry as well, we're focusing on school leaders, because there is this marshmallow ceiling in Education Queensland. There is no solid support. The difference in schools are being made by school principals, and absolute focus on the critical role that our principals play in, the success or failure of our programs. We can be the best teacher with the best intention and everything, and be responsive to learner need and be up to date with ACARA and be trialling things out. But if we're cut off at the knees, there's not a lot we can do. So trying to advocate for our principals, what are the benefits beyond economic, everybody will get a job, blah-de-blah-de-blah. But those true benefits of the well-rounded student who's had a well-rounded education. I get on my soapbox and talk about world peace. That's what we give our students. Early learning in languages, yes. They're talking about apps. Apps. Yeah, phone apps and iPad apps. It's focused on language learning, second additional language learning for early years. So prep. Kindies and preps. ESA has some of the money. ESA is Educational Services Australia. So the triumvirate. So there is ACARA, Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. They are responsible for curriculum development, and NAPLAN. There is AFMLTA, the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership. They are responsible for credentialing of pre-service programs, teachers out of pre-service programs, and the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers and the standards for principals. So that's their remit. Their work is supported by Educational Services Australia. Okay, so it's the old Curriculum Corp. Yeah. So if you are a Chinese language teacher, their resources on their website for Chinese, fantastic. You need to, and actually there's a whole section there that is about language teacher, and whilst it is aimed at Chinese language teachers, there are some very generic things that are just fantastic. In space. If you put in
learning space.
language.
There's a lot of really good stuff that AFMLTA with
absolutely.
Cultural language learning, which is
Yes.
generic, so it's not just Chinese.
Yeah.
Fantastic resources.
And the resources that match, try and map the standards, professional standards for teachers for the accomplished teaching of languages and cultures. The standards that are for language teachers maps that against the AFMLTA standards, the lead teacher standards. As teachers, we have to maintain our credentialing with Queensland College of Teachers, Northern Territory Board of Teachers, whatever. And we do so according to the Australian professional standards. But why not do so through looking at document that makes sense to us, which is the standards for the accomplished teaching of languages and cultures. So
I guess where my question was coming from is this ELA project going to be linked into the ACARA documents that we're all supposed to be working with, or is it, one of these let's all again?
The shorter answer is I don't know. I do not think it will be linked to ACARA because it is a program that sits outside of ACARA's remit. So they're not going to be approaching anybody doing any work on the ELA thing. But I don't think the ELA people will be required to use the, particularly if they have a focus on kindies. They are looking at 3 and 4 year olds, not just not just the 4, 5 year olds. And it's meant to be a way of really young people accessing second languages, and it's looking at things like remoteness as well. So, you know, I think there is also in somebody's head somewhere a sense of remedial work in oral language. Yeah. Yep.
I don't want to dominate the question.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. I missed Simone's talking about CLAL, which I'd love to see.
Yeah.
Where does that sit?
Okay, so what we've got is a curriculum. Here's the content, here are the achievement standards, yada, yada, yada. But there are ways of delivering. You can deliver through immersion. You can deliver through CLIL. You can deliver, so it is a method of providing the instruction. Yeah, so you can absolutely... Yeah, conference, 2nd and 3rd of October, QUT. It's Queensland one, yes. It'll be at QUT at Kelvin Grove, and my apologies, I'm slack and I haven't got the information out.
Cheryl, with regards to 1.3, who's coordinating that partnerships with
it's the executive. So whoever thinks they get a lead on something will take. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Wrap them up.
I'm coming to the rescue with something to keep you thinking about descriptors.
Thank you.
You know,
yes.
elaboration.
Yes. Thank you.
Etc. Etc. I think we all agree that today has been a fantastic forum. I think we've taken with us a lot to think, and I think for me the major point is this advocacy issue. That this is, I mean, even though we have someone as great as you really representing us, I think it is up to each one of us, you know, really standing up and continue really fighting the hard, you know, line of being a language teacher, you know, on the ground.
That's right.
So it's all together. So, you know, let's give a huge
thank you
to our presenter today.